You think a badge makes you a hero? It just makes you a bully with a pension." Hope screamed, her voice cracking as the handcuffs bit into her wrists. Officer Isaac Jennings laughed, a low, ugly sound that echoed off the gymnasium walls. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale coffee and arrogance. "And you think lying about your mommy being G.I. Jane is going to save you from juvie? Wake up, kid. Special forces don't look like you, and they definitely don't breed little liars like you. Now shut your mouth before I add resisting arrest to your fantasy life." The morning sun filtered through the high-arched windows of the Oak Creek Academy gymnasium, casting long, fractured shadows across the polished hardwood floor. It was career day, the one day of the year when the invisible barriers of class and status were made visible, manifested in the form of parents standing beside their children. The air smelled of expensive perfume, floor wax, and the palpable anxiety of teenagers desperate to impress. Hope Carter stood alone near the bleachers, her hands clasped tightly behind her back to hide the fraying cuffs of her blazer. She was 15, with eyes that held a depth of sorrow far beyond her years, and a posture that suggested she was used to taking up as little space as possible. She was one of the scholarship kids, a label that stuck to her like a second skin, separating her from the sons and daughters of senators, CEOs, and legacy families. To her left, Willow Morrison was holding court. Willow was the kind of girl who had never heard the word no without a credit card attached to it. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out, and she stood next to her father, a man whose face was plastered on billboards all over the city during election season. "My dad," Willow announced, her voice projecting with practiced confidence, "is responsible for the urban renewal project downtown. He literally builds the city we live in." A polite ripple of applause moved through the crowd of students and parents. Mrs. Kara Payne, the school's vice principal, beamed. Mrs. Payne was a woman of sharp angles and even sharper prejudices, always quick to smooth the path for a Morrison, and equally quick to place a roadblock in front of a Carter. "Excellent, Willow," Mrs. Payne said, clapping her hands with a dry, papery sound. "True leadership. That is what Oak Creek is about." Hope shifted her weight. She checked the heavy double doors of the gym for the 100th time. They remained closed. "And you, Hope?" Mrs. Payne's voice sliced through the air, dropping several octaves in warmth. She turned, her gaze sliding over Hope with a mix of pity and annoyance. "I see you're standing alone. Again." The gym went quiet. It wasn't a respectful silence. It was the awkward, suffocating silence of people watching a car crash in slow motion. "She's coming," Hope said, her voice steady despite the rapid thumping of her heart against her ribs. "She said she'd be here." Willow snickered, leaning over to whisper to her friend, Ariana Young. Ariana, a quiet girl with a kind face who often looked uncomfortable in Willow's orbit, didn't laugh. She just looked at Hope with sympathetic eyes. "Hope," Mrs. Payne sighed, taking off her glasses and letting them hang by the chain around her neck. "We discussed this. If your mother couldn't get off her shift at the diner, was it? Or the cleaning service? There is no shame in honest labor. But we cannot hold up the presentation for everyone else." "She's not a cleaner," Hope said, her jaw tightening. "And she doesn't work at a diner. She's deployed. She's coming back today." "Deployed," Willow repeated loud enough for the back row to hear. "Right, like in Call of Duty? Or did she just deploy to the unemployment line?" Laughter erupted. It was sharp, jagged, and humiliated Hope more than the silence had. Standing near the refreshments table, pouring himself a complimentary coffee, was Officer Isaac Jennings. He was the school resource officer, a man who wore his uniform a little too tight and walked with a swagger that suggested he was patrolling a war zone rather than a prep school hallway. He had been watching Hope with a sneer since the assembly began. He didn't like the scholarship kids. In his mind, they brought elemental problems to a nice neighborhood. He chuckled at Willow's comment, stepping forward, his utility belt creaking. "All right, settle down," he said, though his eyes danced with amusement. "Let's not be too hard on the girl for having an active imagination." Hope looked at him, her eyes burning. "It's not an imagination. My mom is a master sergeant in the Army Special Forces. She's been on a classified mission for 8 months. The room went dead silent again, but this time the texture of the silence was different. It was incredulous. Jennings slowly capped his pen and tucked it into his pocket. He walked toward Hope, his boots thudding heavily on the floor. He stopped 2 feet from her, invading her personal space, looking down at her with a mock-serious expression. "Special Forces," Jennings repeated, looking around the room as if sharing a joke with the parents. "Sweetheart, do you know how many women have passed the Q course for Special Forces? Do you know the odds of your mother being one of them?" "She is," Hope insisted, her fingernails digging into her palms. "Stolen valor isn't a joke, kid," Jennings said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Claiming military rank that hasn't been earned is disrespectful to the men, the real men who serve. My brother was a Marine. I know what a soldier looks like. And I'm guessing your mom looks like she's more likely to be serving fries than serving her country." The shame was hot and liquid, rushing up Hope's neck. She looked at the doors again. "Please, Mom. You promised." But the doors stayed shut. And inside the cage of the gymnasium, the lions were circling. The assembly moved on. But the atmosphere around Hope had curdled. She was no longer just the poor kid. She was the liar, the girl who made up fantastic stories to hide her pathetic reality. She stayed because she had nowhere else to go. If she left the gym, Mrs. Payne would write her up for truancy. She stood in the corner, clutching her phone. No messages. Willow Morrison had finished her presentation and was now drifting through the crowd, reveling in the adoration. She made a beeline for Hope, flanked by 2 sycophantic friends. "You know," Willow said, swirling a bottle of sparkling water, "it's actually sad. Pathological lying is a sign of deep trauma. Maybe the school counselor can get you a discount on therapy." "Leave me alone, Willow," Hope muttered, turning her shoulder. "I'm just trying to help," Willow said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "It's embarrassing for you. Claiming your mom is GI. Jane? Why not just say she's an astronaut or a princess? If you're going to lie, go big." "She's not lying," Ariana Young said softly. Willow whipped around. "Excuse me?" Ariana stepped forward, looking terrified but determined. "I saw her looking at photos on her phone once. Her mom was in camo. She had a rifle." "Cosplay," Officer Jennings interjected. He had drifted over, seemingly unable to resist the magnetic pull of a power imbalance. He loomed over the group of girls, his thumbs hooked into his belt. "People play dress-up all the time. Doesn't mean they've got the clearance." Jennings looked at Hope, his eyes narrowing. He saw something in her defiance that irritated him. He was a man who demanded submission, and this girl, with her fraying clothes and empty pockets, was refusing to break. "Let me see your phone," Jennings demanded, holding out a hand. "What?" "No," Hope said, clutching it tighter. "That's private property." "It's school property if it's being used to disrupt the educational environment," Mrs. Payne said, appearing at Jennings's elbow like a bad omen. "Officer Jennings has the right to investigate if he suspects disturbance." "I suspect she's got photos of sensitive military equipment she shouldn't have," Jennings improvised, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "If her mom really is Special Forces, having those photos on an unsecured device is a breach of national security. I need to confiscate it." "That doesn't make any sense," Hope cried out, backing away. "You just want to mock me." "Hand it over, Carter," Jennings barked, losing the veneer of patience. "Now!" "No!" Jennings lunged. It wasn't a professional maneuver, it was the move of a bully. He grabbed Hope's wrist, twisting it sharply. Hope yelped, dropping the phone. It clattered across the hardwood floor, sliding to a stop at Willow's feet. Willow looked down at the cracked screen, then kicked it slightly away, giggling. "Assault on an officer," Jennings muttered, though Hope hadn't touched him. He spun her around, shoving her face first toward the bleachers. "Stop resisting!" "I'm not resisting," Hope screamed, tears finally spilling over. "You're hurting me." The gym had gone silent. The parents, previously chatting about golf scores and internships, stopped. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight. Others, the ones who believed that authority was always right, watched with grim approval. "Must be a bad seed," their expressions said. Finally, getting some discipline. "Mrs. Payne!" Ariana shouted. "He's hurting her! You have to stop him!" Mrs. Payne adjusted her glasses, looking at the scene with cold detachment. "If Hope would simply cooperate, Ariana, there would be no need for this. Discipline is necessary for order." Jennings twisted Hope's arm behind her back, leveraging her forward until she was doubled over. "You want to play soldier?" he whispered in her ear. "This is what happens when you mess with the big dogs. You're going to the station. We'll call child services. Maybe they can find this special forces mommy of yours. Or maybe they'll just put you in a foster home where you belong." Hope's cheek was pressed against the cold metal railing of the bleachers. She squeezed her eyes shut. "Mom, where are you? You promised you'd be here." The physical pain in her shoulder was sharp, but the emotional agony was worse. It was the feeling of total powerlessness. The realization that the truth didn't matter when you were poor and black in a room full of wealthy people who decided you were a liar before you even opened your mouth. "Check her pockets," Willow suggested loudly, emboldened by the officer's violence. "She's probably hiding drugs. That's why she's so paranoid." "Good idea," Jennings grunted. He patted down Hope's blazer roughly. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" Jennings sneered. He shook it open with one hand while holding Hope pinned with the other. "Dear Hope, stay strong. I'll be home before the leaves fall. Love, Mom." He laughed, crumpling the letter and tossing it onto the floor next to the broken phone. Pathetic. Probably wrote it herself. Officer Jennings pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metallic snick-snick sound of the ratchets echoed in the quiet gym. "You're making a mistake," Hope sobbed, her spirit finally beginning to fracture. "Please, just let me call my aunt. Just let me go." "Too late for that," Jennings said, enjoying the theater of it. He slapped one cuff onto her left wrist. "You've caused a disturbance, you've resisted a school resource officer, and quite frankly, I don't like your attitude. A night in holding will teach you some respect for the uniform." "You're a disgrace to the uniform!" Hope shouted, the line from the hook of her story tearing out of her throat. Jennings tightened his grip. "And you're a delinquent." He reached for her other hand. Thump. It was a sound more felt than heard. A deep, rhythmic vibration that seemed to come from the sky itself. Thump, thump, thump. The glass in the high windows rattled in their frames. The water in the bottles on the refreshment table rippled. "What is that?" Willow asked, looking up at the ceiling. The sound grew louder, a mechanical roaring that drowned out the hum of the air conditioning. It wasn't the sound of a passing airliner. It was the heavy, chopping percussion of rotors. Low, close. Jennings paused, the second cuff dangling from his hand. He looked toward the main entrance of the gym, which led out to the football field. The noise became deafening. Outside, the wind picked up violently. Through the upper windows, a shadow passed, blocking out the sun. Leaves and debris swirled against the glass. "Is that a helicopter?" Mrs. Payne asked, her voice shrill. "Here? This is unauthorized." Suddenly, the double doors of the gym, the ones Hope had been staring at for an hour, burst open. They didn't just open. They were flung wide with a force that slammed them against the interior walls. Two figures stepped in first. They were dressed in full tactical gear, multicam uniforms, plate carriers, drop-leg holsters, and helmets with communication headsets. They held carbines, though the weapons were lowered, strapped to their chests in a ready-carry position. They moved with a fluid, lethal precision that made Jennings' swagger look like a toddler stumbling in Dad's shoes. The room gasped. Parents pulled their children back. "Secure the perimeter," the soldier on the left said. His voice was calm, amplified by the sudden silence of the room. "Clear," the one on the right replied. Then a third figure walked through the doors. She was not wearing a helmet. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, no-nonsense bun. She wore the same multicam fatigues, but her sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms that were corded with muscle and scarred from service. On the center of her chest, the Velcro patch didn't just say US Army. It bore the insignia of a command sergeant major, and above that, the tab, Special Forces. Eliza Carter didn't walk. She stalked. Her boots made no sound, yet her presence filled the cavernous room instantly. She scanned the crowd with eyes that had seen things these suburban parents couldn't conjure in their nightmares. Her gaze swept over the terrified students, the stunned Mrs. Payne, and landed like a laser target on Officer Jennings. She saw the handcuffs. She saw her daughter bent over the bleacher rail. She saw the fear in Hope's eyes. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Eliza Carter began to walk across the gym floor. She didn't run. She moved with the terrifying inevitability of a tidal wave. Behind her, 4 more soldiers filed in, silent sentinels forming a wall of multicam. Jennings froze. His brain couldn't process the visual data. This was impossible. This was the cleaner, the diner waitress. "Mom?" Hope whispered, her voice barely audible. Eliza didn't stop until she was 2 inches from Isaac Jennings. She was nearly as tall as him, but in that moment, she towered over him. She smelled of aviation fuel, dust, and ozone. She looked down at the handcuffs dangling from Hope's wrist, then up at Jennings's sweating face. "Officer," Eliza said. Her voice was low, smooth, and terrified him more than a shout ever could. "I suggest you remove your hands from my daughter, and if you have scratched even 1 inch of her skin, I will dismantle you, professionally, legally, and physically." Jennings' mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the soldiers behind her, then back at Eliza. He realized with a sinking horror that the predator had just become the prey. I was just... Jennings stammered, his hands shaking as he fumbled for the key. "Now!" Eliza commanded. The click of the unlocking handcuffs sounded like a gunshot in the silent gym. Hope pulled her hand away, rubbing her wrist, and threw herself into her mother's arms. Eliza caught her, holding her tight with one arm while keeping her eyes locked on Jennings. She held her daughter like she was the only precious thing in a world of ash. "I'm here, baby," Eliza whispered into Hope's hair. "I'm here, and I'm not leaving." She turned her head slowly, addressing the room at large, her gaze lingering on Mrs. Payne and Willow. "Now," Eliza said, her voice projecting to the back of the room without shouting. "Who wants to tell me why a decorated combat veteran has to land a Blackhawk on the football field to stop a mall cop from assaulting her child?" The silence that followed was absolute. The silence in the gymnasium wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. The air had been sucked out of the room by the sheer, imposing presence of Command Sergeant Major Eliza Carter and her squad. The dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight seemed to freeze in place. Officer Isaac Jennings, moments ago the king of his small, petty kingdom, looked as though he were trying to shrink inside his uniform. His face had gone from a flush of anger to a sickly, pasty white. He took a half-step back, his boots squeaking on the polished floor, a sound that seemed obscenely loud in the stillness. "I asked a question," Eliza said. Her voice didn't boom like a drill sergeant's cliché. It was far more dangerous. It was the calm, flat tone of someone who had negotiated with warlords and decided whether airstrikes were necessary. "Who is the ranking authority here?" Mrs. Payne, the vice principal, seemed to recover her voice first, though it trembled like a dry leaf in a gale. She stepped forward, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands, her survival instincts kicking in. I am Mrs. Payne, the vice principal, and this is highly irregular. You cannot just land a military aircraft on school property. There are protocols. There is a grown man assaulting a minor. Eliza cut her off, her eyes never leaving Jennings. That overrides your parking regulations, ma'am. Eliza released Hope gently, handing her to the soldier on her left. A towering man with a beard and eyes that softened instantly when he looked at the terrified girl. Doc, check her. Wrists, shoulders, ribs. Now. On it, CSM, the soldier murmured, guiding Hope to a bench. Eliza turned her full attention back to Jennings. She took a step closer, invading his space just as he had invaded Hope's. You, name and badge number. Loudly. I'm Officer Jennings, he stammered, his hand drifting instinctively toward his belt, then jerking away as 3 carbine barrels shifted almost imperceptibly in his direction. School resource officer. Look, Sergeant Major, there's been a misunderstanding. Your daughter, she was resisting. She was creating a disturbance. A disturbance? Eliza repeated, raising an eyebrow. She reached out and plucked the crumpled piece of paper, the letter she had written to Hope, from the floor where Jennings had tossed it. She smoothed it out with deliberate care, then tucked it into her pocket. By holding a letter from her deployed mother? By standing still? She was claiming stolen valor. Jennings tried to rally, finding a shred of his old arrogance. She was making wild claims about special forces. We have to protect the integrity of the service. I have a brother in the Marines. I know how this works. I thought she was lying. Eliza laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. Sharp. You thought she was lying, so you put her in handcuffs. You twisted her arm behind her back? She leaned in, her nose inches from his. Let me educate you, officer. Stolen valor is wearing a uniform you didn't earn to get a discount at a hardware store. It is not a 15-year-old girl being proud of her mother. And for the record, if you actually knew anything about the service, you'd know that the quiet ones are the ones you need to worry about. The loud ones, they're usually compensating. She looked him up and down, her gaze withering. Your belt is loose. Your boots are unpolished. Your stance is unbalanced. You are a disgrace to anyone who carries a badge. You aren't protecting these children. You're hunting them. Now wait a minute. Mr. Morrison, Willow's father, pushed his way to the front. He was a man used to buying his way out of trouble, wearing a suit that cost more than Jennings made in a month. This is a school assembly, not a war zone. You're terrifying the children. I'm Charles Morrison, and I have the police commissioner on speed dial. I suggest you stand down before you find yourself in a military prison for unauthorized use of government assets. Eliza turned her head slowly to look at him. She didn't blink. Mr. Morrison, the Urban Renewal Project, right? Morrison puffed up his chest. That's right. I built this city. You built the condos, Eliza corrected. My team and I just spent the last 8 months dismantling a terror cell that was planning to detonate a dirty bomb in the port 3 miles from those condos. We didn't sleep. We didn't eat. We didn't see our families. We did it so you could stand here in your Italian suit and threaten me. A collective gasp went through the room. The reality of her words hung heavy in the air. As for my assets, Eliza continued, gesturing to the helicopter visible through the open doors, its rotors slowly winding down. This was a sanctioned extraction to home transit approved by the Department of Defense. But even if I had to steal it, I would have, the moment I got the text from my daughter saying she was scared. She turned back to Jennings. Doc, how is she? Contusion on the left wrist. The medic called out from the bench, his voice hard. Shoulder strain. Possible hairline fracture in the radius from the torque he applied. She needs an X-ray. The color drained from Jennings's face completely. Assault causing bodily harm to a minor, Eliza listed the charges in a monotone voice. Deprivation of civil rights under color of law. False imprisonment. She pulled a pair of flex cuffs from her own vest. Officer Jennings, you are detained until the military police and the state troopers arrive. Turn around. You can't arrest me, Jennings shrieked, backing away. You have no jurisdiction. I am a federal officer witnessing a felony in progress, Eliza snapped. And since you are armed and dangerous to these civilians, I am securing the threat. Turn. Around. Jennings looked at the soldiers, at the parents, at Mrs. Payne. No one moved to help him. The aura of invincibility he had worn like armor had evaporated, leaving him just a small, scared bully. Slowly, trembling, he turned around. Eliza cinched the flex cuffs tight. Sit down, she ordered, pushing him into the very chair Hope had been sitting near. And if you speak, I will gag you. The arrest of Officer Jennings broke the spell of silence, replacing it with a dull roar of chaotic whispering. The social fabric of Oak Creek Academy was unraveling in real time. The parents, who 10 minutes ago had been nodding along with Mrs. Payne's lectures on discipline and order, were now frantically checking their phones, desperate to distance themselves from the administration. Willow Morrison stood frozen. Her world was built on a very specific hierarchy. Morrison's at the top, everyone else below, and people like Hope Carter at the very bottom, existing only to be stepped on. But now, the girl she had tormented was sitting on a bench being tended to by a soldier who looked like a Viking, while Willow's own father was being verbally dismantled by a woman in combat fatigues. "Daddy!" Willow whined, tugging on her father's sleeve. "Do something! She ruined my presentation! She's ruining everything!" Charles Morrison brushed her hand away, his eyes fixed on Eliza. He was sweating. "Quiet, Willow. Not now." "But she's a liar!" Willow insisted, her voice rising in hysteria. "She's just a scholarship kid. She can't do this." Eliza finished securing Jennings and turned her gaze toward Willow. It wasn't the angry glare she had given the officer. It was a look of profound disappointment. "You must be Willow," Eliza said, walking over to where the Morrisons stood. "Hope has mentioned you in her letters. She told me you were spirited." I, Willow stammered. "She never told me you were cruel," Eliza said softly. "She protected you. She said you were under a lot of pressure because of your dad. She made excuses for you." Willow blinked, stunned. Hope had defended her? "But I see now," Eliza continued, looking at the students gathered around. "Cruelty is a currency here, isn't it? It buys you popularity." "Mrs. Carter," Mrs. Payne interjected, trying to regain control of her ship. "While the situation with Officer Jennings is unfortunate and will be investigated, we must remember that Hope was also disruptive. She refused to hand over her phone. Defiance of authority is a serious issue at Oak Creek." "She refused to hand over her phone because Jennings was going to break it," a voice called out. Everyone turned. Ariana Young stepped out from behind the cluster of terrified students. She was holding her own phone up, her hands shaking but her chin high. "Ariana," Mrs. Payne warned, her tone sharp. "Be careful." "No," Ariana said, her voice strengthening. "I'm tired of being careful. I recorded it. I recorded the whole thing." She tapped the screen and held it up. In the silence of the gym, the tiny speakers played the audio clearly. "Special forces don't look like you. Doesn't mean they have the clearance." Then came the sound of the slap of the hand, Hope's cry of pain, and Jennings's voice. "Stolen valor isn't a joke, kid. Pathetic. Probably wrote it herself." The video was shaky, but the evidence was damning. It showed Jennings escalating a nonviolent situation. It showed him twisting the arm of a girl who was backing away. It showed Willow laughing and kicking the broken phone. Mrs. Payne went pale. Mr. Morrison closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. He knew a PR nightmare when he saw one. "That video," Eliza said, her voice cold, is going to the Judge Advocate General, the state police, and every news station in the state. Mrs. Payne, you stood there and watched. You condoned it. You lectured my daughter on honest labor while a man assaulted her. I didn't see, Payne stammered. You saw, Ariana said. You looked right at it. You just didn't care because it was Hope. Eliza nodded at Ariana. Thank you, soldier, she said, giving the girl the highest compliment she knew. That took courage. Ariana beamed, tears welling in her eyes. Eliza turned back to Mrs. Payne. I want my daughter's phone. The broken one. Willow looked down at her feet. The phone was still there, screen shattered. She nudged it forward with her toe, terrified to touch it. Eliza picked it up. She pressed the power button. It flickered but didn't wake. She handed it to one of her squad members. Secure this. Forensics can pull the data. I want every text message she received from these bullies cataloged. She looked at Charles Morrison. And Mr. Morrison, if I find out your daughter sent even one threatening message to mine, cyberbullying laws in this state are very strict. And I have very good lawyers. Morrison swallowed hard. We can settle this. The school has insurance. We can replace the phone. Pay for medical. You think this is about money? Eliza asked, genuinely baffled. You people really think everything can be fixed with a check. She walked back to the bench where Hope was sitting. The medic had wrapped Hope's wrist in a compression bandage and put her arm in a sling. Hope looked small and fragile, but her eyes were glued to her mother. Mom, Hope whispered. Am I in trouble? Eliza knelt down, ignoring the dust on her uniform. She took Hope's good hand in hers. No, baby. You are not in trouble. You were brave. You stood your ground. You kept your integrity when everyone around you was losing theirs. That is what a soldier does. Hope started to cry again, but this time it was relief. I just wanted you to be here. I didn't think you'd come. I told you, Eliza said, wiping a tear from Hope's cheek with her thumb. Before the leaves fall, I promised. Through the open doors, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Real police sirens. The cavalry was arriving, but the war was already won. The chaos of the gym had transitioned into the sterile, bureaucratic chaos of the administrative offices. The state troopers had arrived, along with a military police detachment from the nearby base that Eliza had contacted. Officer Jennings had been taken away in the back of a cruiser. His head hung low, no longer the swaggering tyrant. He had been stripped of his belt and his dignity in front of the entire student body. Mrs. Payne was currently in her office with the school district superintendent and 2 lawyers, the blinds drawn tight. Hope sat in a leather chair in the outer reception area. It was quieter here. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a dull ache in her shoulder and a deep exhaustion. Eliza stood by the window, speaking quietly into a satellite phone. She had shed her tactical vest and helmet, leaving them in a pile by the door, but she still looked out of place in the plush, carpeted office. She looked like a lioness pacing in a dentist's waiting room. She finished her call and hung up. She walked over to Hope, pulling a chair close. How's the arm? Eliza asked gently. It throbs a little, Hope admitted. The medic gave me something for it. Ibuprofen and water, the army cure-all. Eliza smiled, a tired but genuine expression that softened the harsh lines of her face. Listen to me, Hope. What happened today? It's going to change things. People are going to look at you differently. They already are, Hope said, looking at the floor. They're scared of you. Good, Eliza said unrepentantly, but that's not what I mean. You see, bullies like Jennings and girls like Willow, they thrive on silence. They count on you being too ashamed to speak up. They count on you believing that you deserve it. Today, you broke that silence. I didn't mean to cause a scene, Hope said. He was saying such awful things about you. I know, Eliza said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the challenge coin she always carried. It was heavy, bronze, with the Special Forces crest on one side and her unit's motto on the other, De oppresso liber, to free the oppressed. She pressed the coin into Hope's good hand. You defended your unit. You held the line. You took fire and you didn't break. In my world, that earns you a citation. Hope looked at the coin, running her thumb over the raised lettering. But what happens now? I can't come back here. Mrs. Payne hates me. Willow hates me. Mrs. Payne, Eliza said with a dark satisfaction, is going to be very busy updating her resume. I just got off the phone with the base commander. The military provides significant federal funding to this district because of the number of officers' children who attend here. General Vance was very interested to hear how the administration treats the families of deployed personnel. I imagine the school board is receiving a very uncomfortable phone call right about now. And Willow? Willow is a child who learned bad habits from a weak father, Eliza said. She's irrelevant. What matters is you. Do you want to stay here? We can transfer you. There are other schools. Hope thought about it. She thought about the years of being invisible, the snide comments, the loneliness. But then she thought about Ariana standing up with her phone. She thought about the look on Jennings's face when the truth hit him. No, Hope said slowly. I don't want to leave. If I leave, they win. They'll think they drove me out. Eliza grinned, and it was fierce. That's my girl. The door to Mrs. Payne's office opened. The superintendent, a balding man who looked like he was having a heart attack, stepped out. He spotted Eliza and practically ran over, his hand extended. Sergeant Major Carter, he wheezed. I am Superintendent Miller. I just arrived. I want to offer my deepest, most sincere apologies. What happened to your daughter is... It's inexcusable. A complete failure of our protocols. Eliza stood up, ignoring his hand. It wasn't a failure of protocols, Mr. Miller. It was a failure of character. Your vice principal watched a grown man assault a student and did nothing because she didn't like the student's tax bracket. Miller flinched. Mrs. Payne has been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a full investigation, and Officer Jennings, well, the police are handling that. But we want to make this right. We want to ensure Hope feels safe here. She'll feel safe, Eliza said, crossing her arms. Because I'm going to be walking her to class for the next few days. I have 2 weeks of leave, and I plan to spend every morning having coffee in your parking lot, just to ensure protocols are followed. Miller looked terrified at the prospect, but he nodded vigorously. Of course, whatever you need. And the medical bills? Eliza asked. Covered, fully, and the phone, and anything else? Eliza nodded sharply. She looked down at Hope. Ready to go home, Trooper? I think we're done here. Hope stood up, clutching the challenge coin. Yeah, I'm ready. As they walked out of the office, through the main hallway toward the exit, students were lingering by their lockers. The whispers started again, but they were different now. There was no mockery. There was awe. Willow was standing by the trophy case, her eyes red from crying. She looked at Hope, then quickly looked away, shrinking back against the glass. She looked small. Ariana was there too. She gave a small, shy wave. Hope stopped. She looked at her mom, then walked over to Ariana. Hey, Hope said. Hey, Ariana replied. Is your arm okay? It'll be fine, Hope said. Thank you. For the video. For standing up. Ariana shrugged, smiling weakly. I couldn't let him get away with it. Your mom is? Really scary, but really cool. Yeah, Hope smiled, looking back at Eliza, who was waiting by the door with the patience of a sentinel. She is. Hope walked back to her mother, and together they pushed open the double doors, stepping out of the suffocating atmosphere of Oak Creek Academy and into the fresh air. The helicopter was gone, flown back to base by the pilot, but the impact of its landing would be felt in the foundations of the school for a long time. So, Eliza said as they walked toward the family car, which one of the squad members had driven over. I missed lunch. I'm thinking burgers, the greasy kind. None of that organic kale stuff you said they serve here. Hope laughed, and it felt like the first time she had laughed in months. Burgers sound perfect. And then, Eliza said, her voice turning serious again, you're going to tell me everything, every name, every incident. We're going to clean house, Hope, top to bottom. Hope looked at her mother's profile, the set jaw, the determined eyes. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the invisible girl. She felt like the daughter of a warrior. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that the war for her dignity was finally over. She had won. But as they reached the car, Eliza's phone buzzed. She checked it, and a shadow passed over her face. It was a text from the base, the legal team. Jennings is claiming qualified immunity. Union is backing him. He's going to fight the charges. Eliza put the phone away. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over, not by a long shot. The weeks following the helicopter incident, as it came to be known in the whispered corridors of Oak Creek, were not the victory lap Hope might have imagined. They were a siege. Officer Isaac Jennings was not a man to go down quietly. He was a creature of the system, a man who knew exactly how to manipulate the machinery of bureaucracy to protect himself. Within 48 hours of his arrest, the local police union had circled the wagons. They posted bail. They hired a shark of a defense attorney named Marcus Thorne, a man who wore suits that cost more than Eliza's annual salary and smiled like a crocodile waiting for a gazelle. The narrative began to shift. The local news, initially shocked by the video of the assault, began running segments questioning the use of military assets on civilian soil. They painted Eliza not as a worried mother, but as an unhinged soldier who had traumatized a school full of children. They painted Jennings not as a bully, but as a dedicated public servant who had made a procedural error while dealing with a combative student. Hope sat at the kitchen table, staring at the local newspaper. The headline read, Hero or Rogue? Army Rangers' tactics questioned in school disturbance. They're making it sound like it's your fault, Hope said, her voice small. She pushed her cereal around the bowl, her appetite gone. Like you're the crazy one. Eliza stood by the coffee maker, reading a tactical tablet. She was dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, but she still held herself with that lethal stillness. This is standard operating procedure, Hope. When the enemy can't win a direct engagement, they switch to psychological warfare. They try to control the information space. But it's lies. Hope slammed her hand on the table, wincing as the vibration traveled up her healing arm. Jennings hurt me. He twisted my arm. How can they defend him? Because admitting he's wrong means admitting the system that hired him is flawed, Eliza said, calm. Thorne isn't defending Jennings. He's defending the liability of the police department. But they made a miscalculation. What's that? Eliza turned the tablet around. On the screen was a complex web of files, dates, and redacted police reports. They assumed I was just a soldier. They forgot that Special Forces specializes in unconventional warfare. That includes intelligence gathering. Eliza sat down opposite Hope. I made a few calls. Not to the generals, to the sergeants, the guys who actually know what happens on the ground. It turns out, Officer Jennings transferred to Oak Creek 3 years ago from a precinct 2 counties over. His personnel file there was sealed. Sealed? Hope frowned. Buried, Eliza corrected. He resigned for personal reasons 2 days before an internal affairs investigation was set to conclude. An investigation into excessive force against 3 minority teenagers in a foster group home. Hope's eyes went wide. He's done this before. He's a predator, Hope. He targets kids who have no one to fight for them. Foster kids, scholarship kids. He picks targets he thinks won't shoot back. Eliza's eyes hardened. He just didn't realize that you have the heaviest artillery in the state parked in your driveway. "So what do we do?" Hope asked. "We don't do anything," Eliza said, taking a sip of black coffee. "The school board is holding a public hearing tonight to decide whether to reinstate him or fire him. Thorne is going to be there. Jennings is going to be there. They think they're going to bully the board into submission." Eliza stood up, smoothing her shirt. "Get your blazer, Hope. We're going to a meeting." The Oak Creek School Board auditorium was packed. It was a space designed for boring budget meetings and choir recitals, now filled with the tension of a court-martial. Parents, teachers, and reporters jammed into the rows of velvet seats. On the stage sat the 5 members of the school board, looking uncomfortable. To their left sat Officer Jennings, wearing a fresh uniform, looking solemn and misunderstood. Next to him was Marcus Thorne, looking slick and predatory. To the right sat the interim vice principal. Mrs. Payne was notably absent. When Eliza and Hope walked in, the room went silent. Eliza wasn't wearing her uniform this time. She wore a sharp, charcoal gray business suit that fit her frame perfectly, her hair in a severe bun. She looked less like a soldier and more like a CEO, but the danger was still there, radiating off her. She guided Hope to the front row, right behind the microphone stand. The meeting began with the usual platitudes, but Thorne quickly took control. He stood up, buttoning his jacket, and launched into a speech about safety and overreaction. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Thorne purred, his voice projecting without a mic. "Officer Jennings has served this community faithfully. What happened in that gym was unfortunate, yes, but we must look at the context. A student was being non-compliant. The officer made a split-second decision to secure the situation, and in response, a military invasion, a helicopter landing on a soccer field. Are we going to let our school policy be dictated by Rambo tactics?" There were murmurs of agreement from some of the parents, the ones who played golf with Mr. Morrison. Jennings nodded along, looking like a martyr. "I move that Officer Jennings be reinstated with full back pay," Thorne concluded, "and that the Carter family be barred from school grounds for disrupting the educational environment." The board president, a nervous woman named Mrs. Gable, looked ready to agree just to end the tension. "Does anyone wish to speak in opposition?" Eliza stood up. She didn't walk to the mic. She marched. She adjusted the stand, the metal screeching slightly. "My name is Command Sergeant Major Eliza Carter," she said, "and I am not here to talk about helicopters. I am here to talk about patterns." "This is not a trial," Thorne interrupted. "Stick to the agenda, Ms. Carter." Eliza ignored him. She placed a thick manila folder on the podium. "Mr. Thorne talks about context. Let's talk about context. Let's talk about 2019, the Riverside Foster Home." Jennings's head snapped up. The martyr act dropped, replaced by genuine fear. "3 reports," Eliza read, opening the file. "Broken wrist, concussion, dislocated shoulder, all ruled accidental falls during restraint, all involving children under the age of 16, all involving Officer Isaac Jennings." "Objection," Thorne shouted, jumping up. "This is slander. Those records are sealed." "They were sealed," Eliza said, her voice cutting through his shouting, "until a federal judge unsealed them this morning at the request of the Department of Defense, citing a pattern of civil rights violations against military dependents and protected classes." The room erupted. Reporters were typing furiously on their laptops. Eliza turned to look directly at the board. "You hired a man who was forced out of his last job for hurting children. You put him in a school. You gave him a badge and a gun and told him to keep order. And when he broke my daughter's arm, an injury that will keep her from playing the violin for 6 months, by the way, you didn't ask if she was okay. You asked if I had a permit to land." She picked up a piece of paper from the file. "I have here a sworn affidavit from the Riverside Precinct Captain. He states, and I quote, 'Officer Jennings was a liability we could no longer afford.'" Eliza looked at Jennings. He was sweating now, pulling at his collar. "But I'm not done," Eliza said. She turned to the audience. Is there anyone else here who has had an interaction with Officer Jennings that they would like to share? For a moment, there was silence. Then a scraping of a chair. It wasn't a scholarship kid. It was a boy in the third row, a varsity jacket wearer, the quarterback of the football team, a boy whose family had a wing of the library named after them. "He caught me vaping behind the bleachers last month," the boy said, his voice shaking. "He told me he'd expel me if I didn't give him my watch. My dad's Rolex." A gasp went through the room. Then another student stood up. Then another. It wasn't just the poor kids. Jennings had been shaking down anyone he could intimidate, using fear to silence them. He was a bully who didn't care about class, only about power. "He told me I was trash," a girl whispered into the silence. "He grabbed my neck," another boy said. Eliza stepped back from the mic. She didn't need to say anything else. The dam had broken. The blue wall of silence couldn't hold back the flood of truth. Jennings looked at Thorne, but the lawyer was already packing his briefcase, distancing himself from the radioactive client. Mrs. Gable, the board president, banged her gavel. "Order! Order!" But she looked pale. She looked at Jennings with disgust. "Officer Jennings, in light of this new information, the board is moving to terminate your contract effective immediately, and we will be turning these transcripts over to the district attorney." Jennings stood up, his face red. "You can't do this! I am the law here!" "Not anymore," Eliza said softly from the stage. "Now, you're just a civilian. Good luck." The fallout was swift and absolute. With the unsealed records and the new student testimonies, the district attorney didn't just file charges, she threw the book at him. Isaac Jennings was indicted on 4 counts of assault, 2 counts of extortion and deprivation of civil rights. The plea deal he was eventually offered involved 5 years in a federal penitentiary and a permanent ban from holding any position in law enforcement or security. He took the deal. The swagger was gone. The last time Hope saw him was on the news, being led out of the courthouse in an orange jumpsuit, looking old and small. But the cleansing of Oak Creek didn't stop with Jennings. Superintendent Miller, realizing his job was on the line, initiated a complete overhaul of the administration. Mrs. Payne was fired for gross negligence. The school implemented a new, strict anti-bullying policy with third-party oversight. And then there was Willow Morrison. It was a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the hearing. Hope was at her locker, struggling to get a textbook out with her healing arm. "Here," a voice said. "Let me get that." Hope flinched, turning around. It was Willow. Willow looked different. Her hair wasn't perfectly blown out. It was in a messy ponytail. She wasn't surrounded by her entourage. She looked tired. Her father, Charles Morrison, had been implicated in the cover-up of Jennings's hiring. It turned out Jennings had done security for Morrison's construction sites off the books. The scandal had cost Morrison his bid for city council. Willow had lost her status as the princess of the city. Willow pulled the heavy biology book from the locker and handed it to Hope. "Thanks," Hope said cautiously. Willow started, then looked down at her expensive shoes. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry, about your phone, about your mom, about everything." Hope looked at her. She could have been cruel. She could have used her new status as the hero's daughter to crush Willow. It would have been easy. It would have felt like justice. But Hope remembered what her mother had said. The loud ones are usually compensating. "Why did you do it?" Hope asked. "Why were you so mean?" Willow shrugged, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Because my dad always told me that if you aren't on top, you're nothing. And when I saw you, you didn't have money, but you weren't scared. You were okay with being you. It made me jealous." Hope sighed. She shifted the book to her good arm. "I can't just forget it, Willow. You made my life miserable." "I know," Willow whispered. "But Hope said. I won't be like you. I accept your apology. Willow looked up, surprised. Really? Yeah. But if you ever come for me or my friends again, Hope said, channeling a fraction of her mother's steel, you know who my mom is. Willow managed a weak, watery laugh. Yeah, I definitely know who your mom is. I think the whole state knows. Good, Hope said. See you in bio. Hope walked away, joining Ariana down the hall. Ariana grinned and linked her arm with Hope's. You're nicer than I would have been, Ariana said. Strategic mercy, Hope said, quoting Eliza. Sometimes it's better to turn an enemy into a neutral party than to keep fighting a war. They walked out into the courtyard. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and sitting on a bench near the entrance, wearing aviator sunglasses and reading a book, was Eliza Carter. She wasn't in uniform. She wasn't in a suit. She was just a mom waiting for her kid. But as Hope walked toward her, she saw the respect in the eyes of the other students. They didn't see a cleaner or a waitress anymore. They saw the silent rank. Hope sat down next to her mother. You didn't have to wait. I'm okay. I know you are, Eliza said, closing her book. But I deploy again in 3 days. I'm soaking up the perimeter time. Hope's heart sank a little, but the panic didn't come. 3 days? Yeah. But don't worry. Eliza knocked her shoulder against Hope's. I left a full tactical briefing with your aunt, and I think the school knows better than to mess with a Carter now. I think they do, Hope smiled. I think I'm going to be okay, Mom. Eliza looked at her daughter, really looked at her. She saw the confidence, the lack of fear, the strength that had been forged in the fire of the last month. You know, Hope, Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion. I've earned a lot of medals. I've been to a lot of places. But of all the ranks I've held, being your mother is the one I'm proudest of. Hope leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. Love you, Sarge. Love you too, Trooper. The story of Hope and Eliza Carter didn't just change a school, it changed a community. It stripped away the veneer of prestige to reveal the rot underneath, and in doing so allowed something stronger to grow in its place. It reminded everyone that true strength isn't about the badge on your chest or the money in your bank account. It's about the courage to stand firm when the world tries to push you down. Karma didn't just hit Officer Jennings, it dismantled him. But the real victory wasn't his downfall. It was Hope's rise. She stopped being the invisible girl and became a beacon for every other kid who felt powerless. She learned that while silence might be safe, the truth is the only thing that makes you free. And as for Eliza, she went back to the shadows, back to the silent wars she fought so others could sleep soundly. But she left behind a legacy that was louder than any helicopter rotor. Hope found her voice, and in doing so, she found her power. But there are thousands of Hopes out there, facing their own Isaac Jennings every single day. They need to know that they aren't alone, and that standing up for the truth, no matter how shaky your voice is the bravest thing you can do. If this story fired you up, if you believe that justice should be blind to a bank account, then smash that like button. It helps us get these stories out to more people. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder to stand tall today. And if you want more stories where karma hits hard and justice is served cold, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You are the squad. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone tell you that your rank doesn't matter. I'll see you in the next one.